I'll have to first have a couple of preliminary remarks. First is that after all these years, I was born in 1857, as most of you know, and after all these years, what was a pretty good English accent has been so mixed up with so many other languages and so many other accents over the years that I just have to do the best I can to try not to sound too American when I'm talking to you, too Southern, or for that matter, too Swedish or French or whatever, or too Zulu. Any rate, when I thought about what kind of presentation I should make tonight, I thought in terms of someone once said that if you speak to an old crowd, you should speak about the past. And a middle-aged crowd, you should speak about current events. And a young crowd, you speak about the future. So, with that regard, I'm going to spend most of my time speaking about the past. But with some about the present and some about the future, and I hope to leave enough time for there to be some questions here. And I also believe in, because my friend Walker says, never abuse a captive audience. And so I'm looking at my watch, and I'll try not to abuse you. And so by that, I'm going to have to speak rather rapidly and cover a lot, because I did prepare with these various slides, and I would suggest that any of you in the far back, if you can't hear me, raise your hand and I'll speak up a little bit louder. And also, in order
Nobody can't hear you.
Well, good. That's perfectly good, because in my many years, I have had numerous sorts of hobbies and activities, one of which was theatrics. And so in the theater, we learned to project our voices. And as, of course, an Army commander, it's very important to make sure that your voice carries and your message carries and your authority carries. Now, I was going to suggest that if any of you would like to move up so you can see the slides better, that will be fine. As you all know, I was born in 1857, and many of you were scouts. I went to a private school. My father died when I was young. My mother had inherited 2 of my stepbrothers from him, and then she had 4 more children. And my name originally was Robert Stevenson Smith Powell. And then my mother kind of added on the Baden later because it sounded better. My mother was a tremendous influence in our lives. She believed in the family method and getting ahead as a family. So that's the way I was raised. And so I went to a place called the Charterhouse School, which was very formative in my youth. It originally was in London, but then it moved to Surrey. And there we had some woods nearby, and I did a lot of sneaking around in the woods and that sort of thing, which I wasn't the best of students. I'll have to admit that. And in fact, when I my father had been a university level professor. And in my home, we knew a lot of important people. Thackeray and other people would be in our home. And so I did not have an ordinary childhood with no intellectual stimulus, but my interest was much more in activities, the kind of things that boys like to do. I happened to be very good at drawing, and you'll see some of my illustrations here, and I could draw equally well with right or left hand. If you'll just hang on, well, that's okay. I couldn't pass the university exams, but I did very well on the Army entrance exams, and I was made a sub-lieutenant. And I was shipped out to India, which I always think of that, India's sunny clime, where I used to spend me time as servant of Her Majesty the Queen. And by the way, I will take off this hat and talk about this hat in just a few moments. I joined the 13th Hussars in India, and I did not see any military action, but I did a lot of sort of things like map reading and administrative things and that sort. I did rise up very rapidly in the British Army because I'll have to admit it, modesty is one of my virtues. I had so many virtues and skills that I rose rapidly in the ranks and became very notable soldier, so that a lot of the generals and people wanted me on their staff. let's see. This is one of my drawings right here in Inja Sunny Climb. And if you go to the next one, you'll see this is the kind of drawings that I would do. And I produced thousands of drawings during those active years. How about another one? And part of the time I served many years in Africa. And I had a great respect for the soldiers that I encountered, the African soldiers, the native soldiers, and we would go out on patrols together and things of that nature. Next, and they were magnificent men. One of the things that was interesting about Zulus that I put in one of my books, I believe it was in the Wolf Cub manual that I wrote, was about how a Zulu boy would get to be right at puberty and they would put white paint on him and then they'd send him out all by himself, nothing but white paint on him. And if anybody saw him, they could kill him, and he could come back when the paint wore off, and that took about a month. Now that's the kind of manly behavior that I think all children should understand, especially our modern. Well, our modern it is a soft world so long as it is soft, but when it becomes hard, then it becomes hard. And I think that it's important that we preserve in our societies that a martial spirit. And go ahead, another one, please. I was transferred. One of the things that I was in was the Ashanti up in the Gold Coast area. And I was in charge of building a road through and organizing a 500-man engineer battalion. And so we essentially made the Ashantis give up because we inexorably went through the jungles with our roads and bridges that we built. And then I was also part of the war in the Transvaal and the Natal, and we call that the Second Matabele War. And in that one I got a lot of personal scouting type experience. And one of the people that I worked with there was an American named with Frederick Russell Burnham. Sorry about that. Have to check my notes. When you've known so many people through the years as I have, it's kind of hard to remember everything. But he introduced me to that American system of scouting and woodscraft, and that was so important here to the forebears, the English and the other forebears in North America. And I was very well aware of the fact that so many young men coming into the service in the British Empire had little ability to take care of themselves in the woods and to become proper scouts. And an army without scouts is blind. And it's been proven so many times throughout history where an army was surprised because it didn't have out scouts, it didn't have outposts. So I wrote a book called Aids to Scouting, which I'll show you in just a moment. This is just a map that I had drawn at one point that talked about South Africa. As you know, Cecil Rhodes was a man of a little bit older than I who made a tremendous effort essentially to bring all of Africa, which is huge, into the British Empire. And Rhodesia was named for him. It's now called Tanzania. And he wanted a rail line that went all the way from Cairo down to Cape Town. So these are just some of the scenes and here's the town of Mafeking. For those of you who don't know, a lot of this had been settled by Dutch settlers, and they were farmers, and the Dutch word for farmer is boer, B-O-E-R. So there was a first Boer War, and then the second Boer War broke out in 1899, in October of 1899, and I was the colonel in charge of the little town of Mafeking, which was up near the border. And so that's where we're going to go to talking now. So Mafeking was a small town with a railroad going through it, and we were immediately surrounded by about 8,000 to 9,000 Boers. Now the Boers did not have a regular army, but they had a lot of men who were very good soldiers, very good shots, very good horsemen, and it's a wide open sort of area. So I was in charge of this defense. Go to the next one, please. Uh, and so we did a lot of what were considered very clever things. We pretended we were laying a minefield out there because they had to watch us through their glasses. So we would have men go out and pretend they were putting mines in. And they'd use cigar boxes they'd put into the ground. And these were my ideas mostly. We came up with an acetylene things that could be used as searchlights. We in these little boxes we had one or two of them. We put some dynamite in and they went off, and so people thought we had a minefield out there, and we had men putting in posts and then pretending to walk over them as if we had stretched barbed wire, because barbed wire was not invented as a defensive tool in World War I. It goes back. In fact, many of the things that go back, we go back to the Boer War and even before, and the rifles, of course, were accurate at long distances, and the Boers had a huge supply of Mauser rifles they had bought in preparation for this very war. And also, when the war broke out and we were besieged at Mafeking, the British armies had several setbacks, and so, but we could get messages out and get messages in. It wasn't that tight of a siege, and it was some ways rather laid back, although people, of course, did get killed. But all over the British Empire, and particularly in the United Kingdom, there was the worry about Mafeking holding out. And we were besieged for 10 months before finally the Mafeking was relieved. This happens to be sort of a paper money that I had made up there at Mafeking. One of the things that happened at Mafeking is the local boys that were too young to be soldiers and impressed in military service volunteered and became sort of cadets and messengers and runners. And it was amazing. Of course, young people are not as afraid of getting killed as older people are. But they showed remarkable bravery. And this one's just something I drew and shows a building being hit by a shell. All right? And so when I got back to England, I was considered a great hero. It kind of surprised me because, like a lot of men that have been in combat, I didn't think that I was so great as compared to the men with whom I served. And so, but I was considered a great hero. And parades, and when Mafeking was relieved, London and all of England went berserk in joy and celebrations in the streets. And I got back several months after that, and I was considered a great hero. So next, please. When I got back, that book, Aids to Scouting, had been looked at, and so that all these boys, I like to say it this way, all these boys in England were playing scouts, like they were army scouts. And my book was selling this Aids to Scouting, which was designed, remember, for young men that were in the military to learn the principles of scouting. And of course, a lot of the principles of scouting involve observation and memory, and of course, trustworthiness. Your officer has to be able to trust you to actually go out there and risk yourself to get the information that's needed. And so a scout has to be brave. A scout has to be resourceful. A scout has to be able to handle himself out there, because it's one thing to get out there and it's quite another thing to get out there, get the information, and get back. So scouting was important. So the boys were playing scouts, just like your American boys were playing cowboys and Indians, because they had all of that going. And Ernest Seton was an American who had written something about the birch bark channels of the American Indians or something like that. I've forgotten exactly. I wish I could remember everything. But at any rate, he was very influential in saying, this is how I think we can help the youth of our country. And I thought, well, that's great. And I had other men. It wasn't just me that started scouting. It was a group of us. We got together. I had ideas about the principles based on my extensive training as a child and as a young officer, training men in the field, and about what really ought to be done. I had been in charge of what was called the South African Constabulary, which was kind of like a police force, cavalry force, after the Boer War ended, where we didn't want to have it be like an army of occupation. We wanted it to be more like police that kind of helped communities rebuild and reestablish and peace to be maintained. So I had a lot of ideas. One of the things was our uniforms. This happens to be a Stetson, and it is an American hat that Mr. Russell helped talk about, and it's a Stetson, and it was called the Boss of the Plains. So that's BP, and that's Baden-Powell, and it works very well for the kinds of things that I thought troops needed. And also I came up with basically a khaki uniform, nothing tacky, just khaki and loose, and a neckerchief. The neckerchief is not for decoration like your ties are, but the neckerchief has these various uses, and the bigger the neckerchief, the better, whether it be to carry fruit that you gather in the woods, or whether you bandage a person's arm with it, or make a signal flag with it, or whatever it is. So we had that. So we tried to make our uniform practical. Now, we also we had an experimental camp at Brownsea Island, which is off of Portsmouth, where a wealthy friend had his house out there, and we went out to this 20 or 30 acre island, and I had 20 boys from various classes, not just public school boys, the public, so your American private school, but we had 20 boys of various kinds, came out there, and we had about 10 days or 14 days where we played games, we separated into patrols. One of the ideas that we have in scouting is that boys have a natural tendency to form little gangs. and the gang is 5 boys, 8 boys, especially in the kind of communities that your parents grew up in, and the kind of small towns where you'd have this little group of boys and they'd have their little private club. And one of the things that we notice in boys is they have a strong sense of honor. And so that's something that we tried to emulate and give voice to, is honor. And so one of the things in scout law is that a scout is trustworthy. His honor is to be trusted. And if he were to violate his honor by not doing exactly a given task when trusted on his honor, he may be directed to hand over his scout badge. That's the way you Americans worded that first of your scout laws. And it was a very serious thing, because a boy giving his scout's honor and lying or not doing that exact task could be thrown out of the scouts. And that was taken very seriously. When my friend Walker went to college, he went to the University of Virginia, and they had an honor code there where lying, cheating, stealing, even off campus, could get you expelled from the school. And that's an interesting concept, isn't it? When we live in a society full of all kinds of misinformation. All right, if you'll go to so this was Brownsea Island. So then after that, I had, you see the part 3 fortnightly. This was Scouting for Boys, and it was published fortnightly for, I forget how many, 6 weeks. And it was a great seller. You'll go to the next. In other words, it was in parts. And then it was Scouting for Boys became the book that we had, that we created. And you can see all of these type illustrations that you see are things that I did. I was very industrious back in those days. And I did all sorts of things. We can talk about that later during questions. But so this is that book. If you go to the next, please. Now, this show, scouting just exploded. And so that Brownsea Island was 1907, and by 1910, scouting had spread into Europe and into the United States. The United States has a legendary story of the unknown scout who was in London in one of those fogs, and the American man came up and asked a boy how to find a place, and the boy told him how to and took him there or something, and the man offered him a tip, and the boy said, "No, I don't take a tip for courtesies or good turns." That was one of the things that we have, one of the scout slogan. And so the man was most impressed. He found out about scouting, came back, and the Americans formed scouting, and it just exploded here also. This just shows me in an early camp. You can see the boys wearing their hats and me wearing one of these Stetsons like this. And so we just had a wonderful time, but it grew so rapidly, then it became problems of organization. And I'll speak about that in a minute, go to the next one. But we just had, it was a wonderful experience, but we had to somehow come up with control. And through the years, the Scouts have determined that we shouldn't even be calling ourselves an organization, we are a movement. And so that's what we all need to be thinking about, a movement. You next? This is the honor and the bravery. This is St. George killing the dragon. That was one of the kind of the little themes that we would have in some of our materials. And of course, I did that. Now this is the boy you see he's wearing the hat. We believe that a staff was a very good idea for lots of different reasons. It could be used for various outdoor type activities, for defense against, for example, a dog or something to use to help thing. And then we encourage physical fitness, because isn't that part of what a scout needs to be? Go ahead, please. And this is one that I really like. That notice he's over jumping selfishness, racial jealousies, religious differences, class consciousness, and grumpiness. And isn't that what we want for our children and grandchildren? Is to be able to overcome all of those drawbacks and all those setbacks. Next, please. This is just a picture of camping. We're strong believers in the outdoor life and how we need to get out and learn nature and be part of it. Not just drive by in our car or whatever, canoeing. And oddly enough, when I was a young man, but when my brother, we went across England all the way up the Thames and then across the hills and down through Wales in a foldable type canoe that we carried. I mean, we did some stuff when I was young. And we went sailing in a boat that he had, my older brother had, and on some high seas out there. Boys and girls need danger. Not just imagined danger, but real danger. They need to confront themselves before it comes time to the time when it's too late to learn what you can do and what you can't do. We believe in boy leadership. I think one of the things that I've observed in the past few years, in this iteration of my existence, I don't mean to sound too critical, but when I see scouting, both here and in other countries, I see too much of the adults doing the stuff. And it should be the boys that do the stuff and the girls that do the stuff. That's how they're going to learn leadership, is by being leaders, not just by listening to some adult lecturing them. This goes back to my idea about bravery, you see, and so the whole idea of the scout rolling up his sleeve and admiring the knights of old who had codes of honor that they lived by. Oh, there we go. And so here we have a British flag, a scout saluting, Athena over there. And of course, we all know Athena was the goddess of civilization, but also a warlike goddess. And then we have the scout sign. Now here we have the scout law. And of course, as you know, the scout law has 12 things. And back when Morgan Robertson joined scouts, he had to learn not just the 12 points, but the entire paragraph that went with that. It was well written. For example, a scout is cheerful. He smiles whenever he can. His obedience to orders is prompt and cheery, and defeat does not down him. He's a friend to all. He's friendly. He's a friend to all and a brother to every other scout. A scout is kind, and he talked about not taking life needlessly and try to save and protect all harmless life. And brave, he has the courage to stand up for the right against the coaxings of friends and the jeers or threats of enemies. Now think about that. How many children are going along with peer group pressure. And that's one thing that they need to understand, that the coaxings of friends. How many children have gotten into trouble because of the coaxings of friends, and they had not enough bravery or enough understanding to resist that getting along. A scout is reverent. He's reverent toward God, and he's regular on his attendance on his religious duties, and he respects other people's religions. So that's important. A scout's thrifty. He saves his money so that he can pay his own way, be generous to those in need, and helpful toward worthy objects. He may work for pay, but may not receive a tip for courtesies or good turns. Next, please. So then we have the scout oath and most of you know this because you were scouts, and it's repeated at meetings and at campfires and all, and it becomes a part of you, just like the things that you repeated in church become a part of you. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country, to obey the scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. That's a big charge, but it's something that they start getting when they're 11 years old and all through their scouting years. Thank you. This is the book when little younger children wanted to be scouts, so we sort of thought backward, and this was the Wolf Cubs Handbook. And we modeled that on wolves in a pack, and the wolves followed Aquila, that's the head of the pack. And then we had a simple motto, which was "Do your best," and that's a great one. And that's something that every one of us should strive to for his or her whole life. Is do your best. Why not? Why do second best? When I was about 57, I was going to the United States on a tour. And it was in 1912, and I met this 23-year-old woman who was English, and we fell in love, and we courted each other, and Olive and I were married in 12 or 13, but and she became, when the Girl Guides were formed, she took over from my sister Agnes, and she ran the Girl Guides, and she was a marvelous companion. She loved camping. She loved all the things I loved. We were of one mind. We had 3 children, and we had a good life together. A lot of age difference, but my father was much older than his wife. Go ahead. Just as many people we know. Anyway, so this is a picture of the little Cub Scouts here, and then behind them the Boy Scouts and their adult leaders, and just a review we had. That's fine. Girl guiding. We even at our first big gathering in London. Let me check my time. Ooh, I'm trying to hurry up. I'm sorry. I hope you're not bored. So, girl guiding we started that in about 1914 because there was no prohibition to girls being in Scouts, but we had to have an organizational method of some kind. Here's some of the beautiful, charming dresses and stuff that were worn in those early years by the Girl Guides. Now look at this. Here's a Girl Guide, and who's this right here?
Princess.
That's right, Princess Elizabeth. And you see and this girl has a messenger pigeon right here in this cage. And here's one of your American Saturday Evening Post, and go ahead to the next one. And now this is I like this picture because this was taken this was based on a photograph taken at the World Jamboree in 1963 when Walker and his brother David and some other people went to the World Jamboree in Marathon, Greece. World Jamborees are held every 4 years, as most of you know. And so there was a wide game, and you had to go out and find boys from different camps, but of different nationalities, and they wrote their names and all on a card. So Walker had one of the guys, he wrote to all of them after the Jamboree, and one of them kept writing back, and they became pen pals, so that in '66, Walker went to northern Sweden where the boy lived, and was there for about 6 weeks. And then the next year, the Swedish boy came to the United States and worked at Camp Bert Adams out there for And then after that, they hitchhiked to California and then up to Montreal to the World's Fair. And then, so he and this Anders Björkman have been friends through the years, and Anders' son came and worked at the Camp Thunder down in there and stayed with Ruth and Walker. And then his granddaughter went to the World Jamboree in 2019, and that I went to that. So this just shows the first class scout, and this is a point that I would like to make with you Americans, and that is that I personally think that we should not overemphasize Eagle Scout, because not every child can become an Eagle Scout, but they can all enjoy scouting and they can learn from it. And the target, in my opinion, is the first class scout. The first class scout and the first class citizen. And the first class scout should have knowledge and some at least fair ability in first aid and life saving and swimming and the things that are required to be a first class scout. So that's my charge to the Americans, is develop first class citizens. Now, this is when there were 40 million scouts. This is in Swedish, but it shows modern scouting. And now modern scouting has had girls as part of it for all these years, and the Americans finally in 2019 said, okay, girls can become scouts, and that's why they've renamed it to Scouts America or Scouting America. But I think it was long overdue, and because girls were going out with their fathers would take the older brothers, and the girls would go camping with them anyway. And with all due respect to the Girl Scouts of America, they essentially quit camping. Some of them still go camping, but most of them don't. And girls need it all. They need the same things that the boys need, more or less, and they do better in scouting than boys do because they have a little bit earlier maturity level. All right, this is Sea Scouts right here. I'm sorry. Oh boy, I'm going. Okay, it's all your introductions took so long. This is Sea Scouts. Go to the next one. We have Sea Scout units all over the world, especially in maritime nations. Go ahead. You Americans are just so rich. You have. I tell American Scouts that you own, as long as you're a Scout, you own Philmont Scout Lodge. You own there's a north base up on the upper lakes where it goes into Canada, where they can go on these long canoe trips. And this is the sea base down on the Keys in Florida, and they can go on these sailing adventures and other maritime adventures. And there's the big place where the World Jamboree was held up in West Virginia. And then, of course, there are numerous councils have camps everywhere. So I tell them, while you're a scouter, you own these places. You are wealthy. Next. Now, scouting is antithetical to totalitarian regimes. And that's why totalitarian regimes ban scouting. And that's just a fact. The Russians did it, they come up with something, the Komsomols, and then the Hitler Youth, and they got something, I'm sure, in Red China. But they don't want the independent thinkers. Now, go ahead, the next one. So I always bring that up to parents because they need to understand how important this is. That's what I tell the Scouts. I say, it's what you're doing here. You're sitting around 11-year-old, 12-year-olds, and I say, this is very serious business, but it's disguised as a game. If you're out, if you don't believe that, think about your fellow Scouts that are out on the front in the Ukraine. Think about those people who are, for one reason or another, have to cook over open fires in the wilderness in the deep winter, or have to perform first aid, or have to do life saving, or all the kind of skills that we hope you will learn while you're a Scout. This is serious business, so you should take it seriously. This is just some of my drawings. I always loved Africa. This represents how we planted the acorn, and it grew into the great tree of scouting. And then there's your American Scouts. This is one of those Norman Rockwell paintings. I think Norman Rockwell will go down in history as one of the great artists the same way that the Dutch artists in the Golden Age we look back at those pictures of common life out there that were painted during the 1600s and 1500s in Holland, and this goes to show the people moving forward. There were 40,000 scouts worldwide, but there are more now. There are about 57 million now, and there were 2,600,000 in the U.S. And this is just another thing I drew, which just shows the world and scouts getting together from all the different countries of the world. I told you I went to the World Jamboree, and when I was at the World Jamboree in West Virginia, I must have had my picture taken 10,000 times. I'm serious, 10,000 times, because people from all over the world, scouters, know Baden-Powell. They know me, and they know what I did. They might not know all about me, just like I don't have the time to tell you all about Lakewood Nation. So this is the 2019. The Americans are just amazing in their logistical conquest of problems. It's just amazing how everything was set up. They had these great outhouse type latrines with solar heating and all this kind of stuff, and showers, and it just ran. Here's Baden-Powell getting my picture taken with a troop from, I think they were from the islands, but they might have been from Africa. There were 35 or 36,000 scouts there, 30 or 40% of whom were girls. There were 8,000 adult leaders, and of that, there was this one group, like 500, who were NRA type people, and we had shooting sports for the first time in a World Jamboree. And guess what? Those scouts from all over the world wanted to shoot those high-powered rifles, and they were high-powered rifles and 9mm pistols, and it was amazing. It was handled safely, and I was very impressed. But I tell those kids, the 11-year-olds, the 12-year-olds around those campfires, you need to be able to shoot, and you need to be able to hit what you're shooting at, and you need your citizenship in the nation and in the world to understand the responsibilities, and to not let yourself get misled by a dictator, for example, and be put out on the front lines shooting at people you have no business shooting at. I mean, so it goes together, you see, the marksmanship to defend yourself, your family, and your country, and the citizenship to know when to do it and when not to do it. Go ahead. We had a Brown Sea Island. Remember I talked about Brown Sea Island? We had a Brown Sea Island there. The Americans have made this little island, and they call this bridge over the Brown Sea Island Ferry. And so these were the people on the little staff of Brown Sea Island. Here I am. Here's John Muir, who was much more in the costume mode of 1907. So say that there. And then the 35 people who were members of that staff. We had like the kind of games that were played on Brown Sea Island in 1907, and so they dressed in kind of period costumes. That was the plan there. Okay, go ahead. Now, this is just a repeat of what I've already talked about: the Scout Oath, the Scout Log. The Scout motto is "Be prepared." Scout slogan: "Do a good turn daily." But think about the motto. Somebody said, "Be prepared for what?" And I said, "For just about any old thing." And you never know. And when I tell these children that say first aid, that's not about getting a badge. That's about your mother might be bleeding to death on the kitchen floor. And are you going to call 911 and watch her die? Or are you going to do something? And if you're going to do something, do you know what to do? And that's the way that I think an 11-year-old deserves to be talked to. They can be treated. Children can take a tremendous amount of responsibility if they're given that responsibility. And so that's one of the things about the camping, is give them the responsibility, the leadership. Let the children lead. Let them understand that it might be their mother. It might be they come on the scene of a wreck and they're only 12 years old, but they know what to do because they've learned what to do. And they know how to stop traffic and do first aid. Okay, next please. So here we are, going off to Brown Sea Island at the World Jamboree. And they're the little conical army tents that that are used there on Brownsea Island and our other tent, and the games we have played. And we had a British flag there, and we'd have twice a day we would raise the British flag and sing "God Save the King," and it was just quite the event, and people really liked it. Is there another one after this? I'm not so sure. Okay, so that's kind of the past with a little bit of the present, and I'm going to finish up quickly because I told you I would, and I've already violated that, but I hope I haven't bored you too much. Now, in the present, we have a worldwide Scout associations. I'm not going to read all the details about this, but we have about 57 million Scouts and adult leaders around the world, and 240 different national Scout organizations of countries and territories, and we all try to. There's a constant attempt to keep it sort of uniform and make sure that it's not misused by countries that, for example, all they really want to do is have a small quasi-military force. But if you're talking about quasi-military forces, I can remember a day, and I'm sure many of you can, when the young men coming into West Point were almost entirely Scouts. And many of them had attained the higher ranks in Scouting. And that was valued. And for that matter, the people that had attained your Eagle Scout Award could go into the Army at a higher rank to begin with, an E3, I believe it was. But that's about what I had to say. I'd like for you all to think about it and to think about what contributions you might make. One of the things that we're going to try to do is start a podcast where Walker and a couple of associates are going to be doing podcasts, but that's not quite ready to get off the ground yet. But there are many things, people around the world who are trying to do things to support Scouting. And I think this is a particularly opportune time for Scouting to have a rebirth in the United States of America, which has always been a strong Scouting country until the last 20 years or so. But a rebirth because people are starting to realize the importance of what Scouting has to offer and how the school systems are not offering what Scouts offer. If I had to choose between having my child go through a big Scouting program for all the years or go through a typical public school, I'd probably say Scouting. And because it brings so much. And that's what I believe. All right, now, I'm sorry that I've gone so long, but do we have any questions?
Hang on.
Oh.
I know I was bored. Before we, that's about the most energetic program I think we've had in a long time. Before we get to questions, we have a response from the club, and Mr. Hal Daniel will be giving that to us tonight.
Thank you, General Baden-Powell, for that history of Scouting. We're very grateful to get the background of the Scouting movement. I would like to address my comments, though, to that Walker Chandler guy you kept talking about. I grew up in Zebulon, Pike County.
Hey!
And the night I graduated from high school, I left with a commencement speaker, only to return occasionally to visit my family. 10 years later, Walker Chandler immigrated from Atlanta to Zebulon, Pike County.
Good way
He
of phrasing it.
established a very successful law practice and became a pillar of the community. Some of you may know he actually has argued in the United States Supreme Court and won his case. But we developed a friendship perhaps because of that Zebulon connection, but also because of Scouting. And we've had this friendship over the years. And what I recognized in Walter from the very beginning was how important Scouting was to him. And it's important to me and to the others who have spoken up, and particularly the Eagles who've spoken up tonight. From my experience as an Eagle Scout, and I've known a lot of Eagle Scouts, I've only known one to lose his moral compass. Tom Jones knows what I'm talking about. And I think that there are reasons for that, and they've been alluded to tonight in this excellent presentation. One thing that I think maybe wasn't mentioned specifically, but I think is very important, is this. I do not know an Eagle Scout who achieved that rank without the support of some adult. It may have been a parent, it may have been a scoutmaster, it could have been someone else, but that's not to say that the adult does the work, but you have to have that support. In my case, it's my father. You know, he would never let me quit when I think about the what was it, perfume and all those sort of things. And I think that because of that support, these young men and now young women are well grounded. But the other part is something you referred to several times, and that is the Scout law. And those points are very important, because basically a Boy Scout and now a Girl Scout is saying that I subscribe to these principles, and I want to live by these principles, and they are trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Now, those principles, if you live by those principles, you are going to make a difference in this world. And you are going to be a person who has influence and can truly make a difference. And so I want to thank you for your presentation about the history of scouting. And I think that we should all aspire to live, whether we're in Scouts or not, by the principles of the Scout law. Those are principles that make us better people and help us, in fact, change the world.
David?
I noticed in one of the, I've got two questions. The first one is, I noticed in one of your drawings that you had a British flag and the word Eagle Scout. Was Eagle Scout ever used by the British?
No, we had Queen Scout.
No, I realize.
Not many boys attained Queen Scout, but it was, and I don't recall which all badges had to be gotten. You know, the Americans Eagle Scout was 21 badges, but some were required, like life saving and first aid, and then now the Americans have like 150 badges, and some people get so many you're wondering, is this inflation? But be that as it may, we had that, and Eric was saying how they had an equivalent in Holland, which, the Netherlands, which that he obtained. And what was it called? I've forgotten. My Dutch is so weak now.
I was in the Sea Scouts.
Yes. Yep. Donkey Bell.
The other question was, were you a Mason?
Who?
Were you a Freemason?
No.
No?
No. I was busy. I was too busy for that. Yes.
Jim?
I don't have a question, but I've got something you need to know. Charles Daniel was one of the big things. Remember the guy that sponsored me as membership in this club? His name is Bob Rapp, R-A-P-P. Little short, ducky guy with his glasses down the end of his nose, it'd take him 3 times to get through that door over there. He had every award that scouting gave. He was into that all of his life. The years that I knew him, they were having the National Jamboree at A.P. Hill in Virginia. Some 40,000 boys up there. He was responsible for feeding them all while they were there. But Bob, you go around here, you never know him to do of anything of note. He was one of us, who was our club member. He passed away a few years ago, but he was here, he was us.
If I may make a point, David Grant was a member of your club, and he was extremely active in scouting, and particularly in the life saving and swimming. type things. And the first man on the moon was an Eagle Scout. So,
Yes, sir. Great. Oh, go ahead, Richard.
I was a Boy Scout over in the UK. I never became a queen, I'm afraid. But I was a Boy Scout. I was in the 50s, actually. Yeah. I had a friend who was in Rhodesia. You mentioned Rhodesia, and this friend of mine had to get out of Rhodesia when Zimbabwe took it over, and went down to South Africa. And he was a Graham, like me, and there was a group of soldiers there, part of the South African military, and he referred to them as Afrikaans. The Afrikaans are kind of thought that they were from the Dutch side and not from the British. Okay, but the funny thing was that they wore the Graham kilt. And since he was the Marquis of Montrose, actually, James Graham, he was made Colonel-in-Chief. But I wondered about the Afrikaans and whether they were part of that scouting movement down there with Baden-Powell.
well, I think they were, but we have to remember the Afrikaans also essentially controlled the government of South Africa during the apartheid theory, and they were the hardcore of the apartheid stuff down there. And so now that, history will judge, but they were, hardworking people and good soldiers. And of course, South Africa did great contributions to British war efforts in both the Great War and the Second World War.
The Afrikaans were much part of that.
Yeah.
I wondered about the Dutch and the British.
Mhm.
They had a Dutch side, I guess.
Well, Afrikaans is Dutch. The language is Dutch, essentially.
Oh,
Yeah.
Great.
thank you.
I just want to say that's one of the best presentations I've seen this far. I mean, your visuals were perfect, your costume, your accent.
That's all right.
I can't thank you enough, Walker. I mean, it was just fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in Cub Scouts. My church didn't have a Boy Scout troop, but I was determined when I had a son, he was going to go through scouting. And he did. He ended up getting his Eagle Scout, going to the Citadel, and so I'm very proud of him. But, I must say, my son applied to the Citadel, and he had also ancestors from my wife's side who went to VMI. And so he hadn't heard anything back when he put in his college application at the Citadel. So I'm traveling around the Southeast. I have to be in Charleston. Stop by the Citadel, go in the admissions office. I'm going to see what's going on. So the secretary ushers me back to the captain's office, the head of admissions, and I said, I just wanted to drop in and see if you got the application okay, if there were any issues. He said, well, let's pull him up. What's his name? I give him the name. He said, well, tell him about him while I'm pulling him up. I said, is he athletic? I said, yes, sir. He was on the football team, very athletic, 6 foot, about 180. He goes, well, athletics is very important at the Citadel. And he said, well, how's his grades? I said, well, he's an AB student. Probably 50-50 there. He goes, well, that's good. Academics are very important at the Citadel. Then he said, is there anything else you can tell me about him? I said, well, he got his Eagle Scout. He stopped, turned from the computer, looked at me, he goes, you'll be hearing from him in 3 days. I never have told my son that story. But indeed, 3 days later, he gets notice in the mail that he'd been accepted in the Citadel. So I contribute Boy Scouts to getting him to where he is today. Certainly, as a Scout leader for 18 years, I learned a lot. I mean, it was extremely rewarding as Assistant Scoutmaster, District Commissioner. I collected all kind of scouting memorabilia. I have that 10 shilling note signed by Robert Baden-Powell that you showed up there. I have first editions, autographed pictures of him from him. But, certainly, scouting means a lot to me, and it has been to my family. And certainly, one of the lessons I learned was in Cub Scouts, the parents lead everything. They decide the program, what's going to happen, activities. Then when you get to end of 5th grade, you transfer over into Boy Scouts in 6th grade. But in between that 5th and 6th grade, you go to summer camp for a week or 2. And you work on merit badges. And the merit badges are taught by Boy Scouts. The instructor, they're the instructor. So here I am as the den leader of this den for 5 years. And I'm used to being in control, making sure everybody does everything right. And so my son goes to the first meeting, the first merit badge class, and this kid, he couldn't have been 15 years old. I mean, he was just floundering terribly. I mean, he just was missing the mark, and so I said, I need to step up and help this guy. So I walk up and introduce myself and say, let me help you with this. The boy acquiesced and said, okay. And so I started to help out. And of course, about that time, this old grizzly guy with a staff walks over to me. He said, Mr. Slate, can I have a talk with you a minute? Pulls me over to an oak tree and says, look, Mr. Slate, you just got out of Cub Scout hat. I've never met this guy. He knew. He said, I know you're used to running things, but here in Boy Scouts, we let the boys run things. He said, I know you can do it quicker, faster, better, and provide a better quality program. But the boys learn how to run it themselves. He said, the best thing you can do is just stand over here with me underneath this old shade tree and let that boy do his thing. So after that, I got the message, and it was a very rewarding day for me because it cooled my jets, so to speak. And I must say, thank you, Walker. Best program ever. I appreciate it, sir.
William Todd, last thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, incredible presentation. Incredible, and I took a picture of you when you were standing over there like that. It's like you were posing for that picture.
You don't think I'd do something like that?
But it was amazing, the resemblance. I've already sent it to my family, and everybody's going, wow, they can't believe it. And you're a celebrity, and I just want to say that you remember that slogan that went out, probably 25, 30 years ago. They were saying, boy, we need scouting. And I'm sort of sad because I think scouting is, in some respects, sort of died out in the areas I'm at. And I think what you said about camping, there needs to be more camping, because if you can get anybody, a boy or a girl, interested in camping, it's something that stays with you your whole life. And I've been a wilderness camper my whole life because of my Boy Scout experience. I learned to cook and so forth, but I'd give you an A+. You did great.
I want to say, I know that I don't mind staying up here and talking, but at any rate, the meeting you after this, but I want to say when Walker was a scout, he was made a part of this thing called the Order of the Arrow, and they have something called the ordeal where the boys go out and the Indians have these ceremonies, and there was this one Indian on the top of the hill who was the medicine man, who had his face painted black and white, and he gave this beautiful speech and then shot this flaming arrow up into the air, and it made such an impression. And that scout was Jim Dew when he was about 16, and I just wanted to make a point of that.
Jim Dew was part Indian. Well, Lord Powell, I know you've gotten a lot of accolades throughout your life, a lot of awards. but this may be the greatest one of your life. Burns Club Dishwasher Safe. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you so much.
Circle up.